return. As you've probably heard before, my pop is out actually on the farm today, and so that's the wonderful part of this. And I've done 2 of my 3 tours around the state with legislators and business people. And probably the biggest surprise has been the drop of oil prices pretty dramatically, and the effect on some of those brave people out on the front lines in oil country. That's been a surprise. I hadn't anticipated that back in April when you all hired me.
You're coming into a university system that has been through a lot over the last few years. Former Chancellor Potts, a lot of controversy around his exit. Former Chancellor Hamid Shirvani, a lot of controversy around his exit. A lot of acrimony at times between the legislature and the university system. Now that you've gotten your feet wet, you say you've spoken with legislative leaders, you've spoken with business leaders. What's your take on this situation? What's your take on this system that you're put in place to oversee?
Yeah, well, great question. And again, I've got a third loop to get around to the colleges, because they're obviously on the front line with the students and creating knowledge and educating. But with the legislators and business people, it's interesting, kind of a different representation of issues. First off, the legislators have been very generous. And we have kind of a natural tension built in with the state board, which I think we might have talked about the last time you and I spoke, that, Governor Langer created this state board, which then, is kind of like a fourth branch of government, and we got to work with legislators. So getting around with them, one of the key messages was to work better with them, understand that their heart is behind the students. They want a future for their kids, and working as positively, constructively with the legislature. And they want a system, they want efficiencies, they want students to graduate faster. The business people, interestingly, they need people. They need people to stay in the state. They needed more skilled people. They want maybe young kids who are shooting lower on their plans for education and certifications. They want them to shoot higher, and they want us to fill their jobs, and they want people to stay in the state. So interesting to hear from those two, those who provide the money for us and those who absorb our graduates into wealth creation, job creation. And so that's kind of the difference I'm seeing, complementary but different views of the challenges going ahead.
You talk about the legislature, and of course, obviously, the relationship there is the legislature, they hold the purse strings. They appropriate the money. They have been, as you said, really almost fantastically generous. As a matter of fact, since 2008, North Dakota leading the nation in terms of growth in higher education spending, and second place Wyoming is not even close. And yet, we look at the campuses. I think a lot of people struggle, and I know Representative Bob Martinson, during a recent meeting with him, I think he brought this up when you were talking about a strategic plan. He was almost sort of dismissive of the plan, saying we've seen these come and go. We want to know what we're getting for our money. The legislature, we're continuing to see tuition go up every single year. We're not really seeing a lot of improvement in academic outcomes. Graduation rates are stagnant. It's really, in a lot of ways, you look at some of those numbers, and they're just not very good numbers. How can these things be improved?
No, it's a great question. And, I am the new guy here. And, you kind of let off about previous chancellors. Barring a third world war where I get reactivated in the Navy, I plan to, get buried out by Crown Butte. My heart is here for these kids to try to build a future for them. And I'm not happy about the numbers either. I've got a great staff that's worked on this. And, we only have a 23% graduation rate after 4 years. That's not acceptable. What is the reason for that? And I'm only in the job now 2 months, and we're actually, putting together some study groups to examine what is the root cause, a combination of causes. Is it cost? Are the families getting depleted economically? They can't keep paying the bills. Are the kids getting matched to the wrong program when they come in? Do they perhaps not have the preparation they need? Is it counseling? Do we need this could be counterintuitive, but one state legislator said, before you go after the tooth-to-tail ratio, more administrative versus teachers, he said there's a crisis of suicide, drug addiction, alcohol. Some of these kids are dropping out, she said, because of these other things you wouldn't expect 20, 30 years ago. So you're right on. You're pointing to something we got to bring up. It's not acceptable, but I don't have enough knowledge yet to understand why. And I'm also mindful that we do have 11 campuses, very distinct regions in our state. Again, the oil country right now is on the front line, And so that's probably why, responding to this, we've started this Bach and You initiative. I don't know if that's hit your airwaves yet up there, but getting the word out to students or workers on the oil fields that we have potential programs for them that could fit well to help meet some of that. And we can talk about Bach and You a little more if you have time. But,
sure.
But go ahead. What other questions do you have?
Well, I guess another question that I have is, certainly, we were talking about former chancellors, and you're, like I said, coming into a situation that has at times been very rocky, very tumultuous. Do you fear a little bit? Some of your predecessors, I'm speaking specifically Chancellor Potts, speaking specifically Chancellor Shervani, when they have tried to implement a certain plan that has proven unpopular with some of the administration at the universities, I think the public perception, and I think it's the right perception, is that they were pushed out. Are you afraid of that? I mean, do you feel like your hands are tied in trying to implement policy if you get pushback from the universities that you might be hung out to dry?
No, I don't really, maybe some of the changes in the president since that time has happened, but I can give you two examples of presidents that are doing remarkable work. D.C. Costin had to step down at Dickinson. He was willing to stay in the job literally till he dropped dead. And we said, you've got to take care of your health. And when he had his farewell talk, I tell you, I had a lump in my throat. He talked about a young student who was a single mother, lovely girl, and Dickinson rallied around this girl. She graduated. Now I think she's on Senator Heitkamp's staff, and his heart was with the students. We had another president who just had to bury one of his staff. He was wearing his heart on the sleeve. So the presidents I'm seeing here, and I haven't gotten to know all of them incredibly well, but I think they're in it for the long haul. They're in it for the kids. And if I find a president, who is less inclined for that, I'm an old ship captain, and we have metrics and we have goals and whatnot, but I haven't seen it yet. And again, I'm only 2 months in here, and I'm sure your blog will call my attention to anything that falls short, which yeah. My people occasionally look at your blog. But what I'm seeing is people, I had another president who had a child who had open heart surgery and who was still trying to do his job from there. And I said, stop. Just focus on your son right now, you know? And so those are the impressions I'm getting so far. But again, I'm metric driven, and we're going to be having a chancellor's cabinet meeting. We have metrics. It's not emotional. It's, here's this issue. Your attrition is, let's say, higher, or retention is lower, depending on how you say it, than other colleges in your tier in the state. Can you explain these differences? And, from the Navy background, I had 5 ships cross the ocean. Some ships actually had unexpected engineering problems because they went through a bunch of basically fish in the sea, seaweed, squid, and fouled their condensers. They could explain why their performance dropped. So if a president can explain why their performance is lower, let's say they're in the oil patch, then I'm all ears. But if they can't explain performance, then we have to look deeper and work together as a team. And that's what I see, is that working as a team for the young people.
I have to take a commercial break. Can you hold through the break? We'll finish you up by 10:30?
Sure.
All right.
Sure thing.
701-293-9000 if you want to call in. North Dakota University System Chancellor Mark Hagerott is my guest. 888-970-9329 is a toll-free number. You can tweet me to @RobPorter. Email talk@wday.com. We'll be back right after this. Don't go away. Let's talk about open records requests for a moment. Again, very rocky relationship. I think since 2010, I've counted 19 open records violations to conclude. That was the conclusion of the North Dakota Attorney General's office between the member institutions and the university system itself. Open record, open meeting violations. I have had state lawmakers tell me explicitly that they believe that NDSU President Dean Brashani specifically has deleted emails in the past rather than turn them over. That's their belief. There is a general feeling, in fact, I had another lawmaker tell me that when it comes to the university system, he often feels that the because the legislature is only in session every 2 years, that the university system has 2 years to figure out how to fool us for 80 days. A lot of just absolute they don't trust the numbers that the university system presents. They feel that what the university system brings them is self-serving. And not honest and not accurate. I mean, that's certainly not a universal feeling among lawmakers, but certainly a feeling among a significant number that I've spoken to. In my experience, frankly, getting records at times out of the university system has been abysmal. Some areas it's been just fine. Other areas it's been very poor. When I talk to some journalists in the state, they jokingly call, for instance, the University of North Dakota the University of Non-Disclosure. They call NDSU Non-Disclosure State. Coming into a situation like that, do you see a transparency problem? And B, if you do see one, how do you plan on fixing it?
Yeah, a great question. And our state is unique. It's one of the nice things about our state is we have probably among the most open records cultures in the country, and which can cause some difficulty. Like we're about to do these searches, the search for UND and Dickinson State, and immediately the candidates' names have to all be out there the moment the search window is closed. And I know that causes some difficulty where people are used to having more privacy. So I actually am very comfortable with the laws we have. I'm glad we have them. There's a lot of states where I've been stationed in my time where corruption and cover-up were the norm. And so I've actually looked at the open records violations in the past. I think a lot of them were related to training and procedures. And so what I put in place is before we have any meetings, the Attorney General has been really supportive because, my lawyers all moved down, or the former Chancellor's lawyers all moved down to the Attorney General or were rehired. Some were rehired, to be more correct. And we have a very good relationship with them, frequent meetings. They review our procedures before we go into a meeting, and when possible, I ask them to be at the meetings and help us out if we're about to do something. That I said that under no circumstances do I want to violate anything or cover anything up. And you're talking to a guy who's had a top secret clearance for 30 years, or my entire life is reviewed by people all the time. So I'm used to that, and so I'm with you that we don't want a repeat of that past, because what it does is it erodes confidence. Even if it was just a honest mistake, people can interpret it otherwise. And so we don't want to have those. I hope eventually over time it becomes a question that you don't have to add, because I know there's lots of things, having met before, where you've got a wide capacity for issues and knowledge, that hopefully that one will begin to fade, though I think you're on an advisory board for the Attorney General on this. So we're putting in place training. We've had training already. We've asked the lawyers to partner with us very closely. And again, since the lawyers don't work for me directly, I think they can be more honest, saying, no, sir, that would be a violation. They can speak up with complete, impunity, and that might help too. Maybe in the past lawyers didn't speak up as much because they felt their boss didn't want to hear it. Again, I don't know which chancellor that might have been, but that's how I'm approaching it. Follow the rules and the laws to the letter, and the I's dotted, the T's crossed.
In your eyes, the number one challenge facing higher education, both in North Dakota and nationally?
The number one challenge, well, like I said, I haven't been around to the campuses yet. I think right now for us, because again, I think when we spoke, I see my job in a couple different ways. One, keep the trains running on time. We have to, our processes have to run. That includes open records, working with the legislature, working on the studies with Representative Sanford. We've got a great group of studies looking at our system over time. Then adapting to changing conditions, and the biggest challenge I see right now that just has happened is this disruption to the oil patch. Really heroic young people have come out there. They've built an industry for us, and now their jobs are under pressure. So we are trying to adapt short term with this Bach and you. Just again, I know you're mindful of money and budgets. We're not starting a new university. We are building a consortium of the 5 Western universities that are focused on meeting the needs of oil workers, trying to get them to stay here in the state, enroll in our programs. We're focusing on the Western campuses first, because we think about an hour drive any oil worker, they can get to one of these campuses. The third challenge is in the category of creating something new, and I think UND is an example of that with their unmanned research. That the whole new programs, they're 10 years ahead of many universities here. So challenges kind of each of those categories. Meet the needs day to day, respond to local events like the drop of oil prices, and then create new stuff. And again, I want to wait till I met the campuses and the faculty to hear their thoughts on that. But that's how I'm approaching it.
Do you feel North Dakota's a state just over 700,000 people? We have 11 institutions of higher education. Is that too many?
It's interesting. One of the things the interim legislature committees are going to study, and we're looking at, is mission. That is going to be something we look at. But my gut feeling is North Dakota's model, is right with the times, because one of our pillars of our strategy, remember our strategy, I think it was C squared, a super system, that's the S squared. E squared is excellent, equipping our kids for the future, passing their certifications, bar exams, medical boards, but then accessible and affordable. And these campuses, for a big state like ours, I think we're the 15th biggest state in the union, that 11 campuses bring educational opportunities to people in remote areas. So, we have to look at costs. Cost containment are things we'll be studying. But I think with a state our size, we got to be there for people. So that's my gut feeling, unless people can prove to me otherwise, that big state needs a good number of campuses to meet those needs.
Talking about cost, North Dakota University system in terms of taxpayer appropriations, well over 100%, more than doubled over the last decade. Enrollment, however, has been fairly stagnant. Only about an 8% increase in enrollment during that time. What sort of things are you looking at in terms of controlling costs? I mean, in what areas can we control some of the costs, both for taxpayers and for students?
Well, we actually have a study group that, again, working with the legislature, but our own from the Chancellor's cabinet, is going to be looking at that. And as the price of oil drops, that has some downward pressure, though our leaders have been very thoughtful so that we're kind of buffered a little bit from these crazy gyrations. But one of the things I think is promising is shared services, and already a couple of our schools are already moving out on this. For example, payroll. How many people do you need to cut payroll checks? In the old days, people handed people checks. I mean, I'm old enough that I remember that. People handing me a check. And then you start going to direct deposit. And then you start to move backroom operations around. So already a couple of our universities are sharing that service so that they can redeploy basically full-time equivalent positions to help the students on the front line. Maybe it's substance abuse counseling, or maybe it's actually another professor in a classroom offering a course that we need in medical technologies, which is a big growing field, I know, out in Fargo. So that's one, is containing costs by sharing services and then basically moving those resources to do other things for the students. And potentially another case, I think this is Gary Hagan out at Mayville, where he decided not to hire a building specialist because they've got some building programs starting. He's going to rely on one of the neighboring colleges that already has experts in construction management to oversee their plans. And so that's the kind of the shared services thing, I think, which is a no-brainer. And again, we're going to have a college president leading a task force on that, moving forward on some ideas. Again, trying to find out what are the first things we should work on. So I'm mindful of that, and I'm always mindful of, your readers or your bloggers or writers, they have suggestions. There could be some good ideas out there that we haven't heard yet. So we're open to those.
All right, Chancellor, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for being someone who sends information out. We appreciate that.
All right, that's Chancellor Mark Hagerott, Chancellor of the North Dakota University System. More straight ahead, going to talk with freelance journalist Justin Glau about that article on armed drones in North Dakota that got so much attention last week. Stay tuned. This is The Hot Seat on WDAY. Don't go away.